Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for Nonprofit HR's virtual learning event. Today's session is entitled Advancing DEI in Highly Intricate Nonprofit Associations, Impact Stories, and Lessons Learned. My name is Atokatha Ashman Brew, Managing Director for Marketing and Strategic Communication. I will be your conversation moderator for today. We have a lot of great content to cover on this very important topic. Just a brief note about Nonprofit HR. Since 2000, Nonprofit HR remains the country's leading and oldest firm focused exclusively on the talent management needs of the social impact sector, including nonprofits, associations, social enterprises, and other mission-driven organizations. We've focused our consulting efforts on the following practice areas: strategy and advisory, HR outsourcing, total rewards, equity, diversity, inclusion and justice, and search. Today's conversation will be led by experts from our EDIJ and search practices, and we will be joined by several nonprofit HR clients whom I will introduce shortly. And now, a little about our panelists. Dr. Antonio Cortez serves as Managing Director for Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Justice for Nonprofit HR and is an industrial, organizational, and business psychologist with extensive experience in the nonprofit sector. In his current role, he provides strategic and operational leadership to the EDIJ practice areas. Areas of support include organizational equity assessments to uncover oversight in operations that lead to inequities, strategy development to solve unique organizational issues in the EDIJ space, global application of EDIJ concepts for multinational organizations, and training. Stephen Krasnowski is Senior Consultant for EDIJ. Stephen's career is rooted in the higher education and nonprofit sectors, where he has developed and executed DEI programs and strategies. In his current role, Stephen works with industry leaders as a thought partner to uncover inequities in organizational systems, address gaps in knowledge and skills, and develop intentional, data-driven, and actionable outcomes to advance EDIJ initiatives. Bert Ruiz serves as Managing Director for Impact Search Advisors by Nonprofit HR, where he leads a team of talent and experts who deliver executive and professional retained search and recruitment outsourcing services. With a 23-plus year career in the nonprofit sector, Bert serves as a trusted advisor on search and recruitment outsourcing engagements with our clients. Dr. Pro Brewer, Senior Manager, DEI Leadership Development, Office of Equity and Inclusion at BECU, a nonprofit HR client. Dr. Brewer is a strategic DEI practitioner with 10-plus years of combined experience in clinical psychology, diversity, equity and inclusion, and learning and development. Dr. Brewer currently serves as a senior leader in the Office of Equity and Inclusion at BECU, the third largest credit union in the nation. Pro thrives in organizational design and working with senior and executive leadership teams to design, develop, and measure strategic imperatives and outcomes from a DEI lens. Dr. Sonia G. Smith is Interim Chief of Staff and Chief Diversity Officer for the American Dental Education Association, ADEA, another nonprofit HR client. Sonia has strategic and operational responsibility for ADEA programs. As the Chief of Staff, Dr. Smith functions as the ADEA second in command and acts on behalf of the President CEO in her absence. Having served as the ADEA Chief Diversity Officer since 2017, Dr. Smith also leads efforts to promote diversity, access, equity, belongingness, and inclusion. And finally, Otheline Lawrence is head of IDEA Association of Fundraising Professionals, AFP, another nonprofit HR client. Otheline is a proud graduate of Howard University, Harvard University Senior Executive Fellow, Certified Diversity and Inclusion Executive, and an environmental scientist. Otheline's key strengths include developing, managing, and executing innovative and creative initiatives to enhance employee engagement and identify viable opportunities to strengthen partnerships with academia, communities, and the private sector. Otheline's most satisfying work involves leading collaborative and innovative initiatives to help provide solutions to complex problems and provide access and opportunity to underrepresented groups. And now, I'd like to turn it over to our panelists to continue with the main program of the day.
Thank you, Atokatha. And if you can advance to the next slide, what we'd like to start off the conversation today is just to share a little bit about both the search and the equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice practice at Nonprofit HR, to highlight the types of support that we provide to our client partners and to give you a sense of what that process commonly looks like. So to start that conversation off, I want to turn it over to Bert and share a little bit about the Impact Search Advisors process.
Great, thanks, Antonio. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with our panelists. So what you're seeing here is what's important to us in the search process is really the candidate experience. We obviously implement a multi-step process when we're working with our clients, and part of that is ensuring that the candidate has a positive experience, because it is a reflection of the client organizations that we're partnering with. So what we've laid out here is an overview of the process and steps that our candidates go through. So Thaleen had the opportunity to go through this through a search that was led by one of our consultants, Cassie Bacon, in her engagement. And you can see some of the steps that we outline here. We typically start with the sourcing step, where we're looking at our networks, identifying those prospects that we believe align with what the client is searching for. We typically will conduct screenings with our candidates, and in these discussions, it's critical that not only are we learning more about the candidates that we're meeting with, but we also want to make sure that we're providing the relevant information that the candidates are seeking. It's very common for our candidates to have questions about the organization. So when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, there are some key elements of that work that need to be shared with our candidates, because it is a two-way street. We want to ensure that both parties have an understanding of what the goals are, if they are to match up each other and take on the role. So we'll conduct the screening, we'll conduct additional vetting with the top candidates as we decrease the pool that we will present to our client partners. And then finally, we're presenting the finalists to be considered. And this typically includes reviewing their portfolio, any additional data that's been provided, and then embedding questions or topics in the interview discussions. If we move on to the next slide, we'll talk, I'll show you here a little bit about what our timeline looks like for our search process. So this typically can vary. This can vary based on the client partner's availability. In some cases, we're working with a hiring committee, a search committee, or a supervisor. So as you can see, our timeline can vary based on the number of days we spend in each phase. We typically say it's about 3 to 5 months for our professional and executive level searches. And this just maps out what that looks like: engagement and assessing the needs, identifying those candidates and conducting the screening, obviously presenting the candidates to an executive committee for assessment. And then additionally, what our firm does that maybe a lot of other firms don't do is once the candidate's placed, our consultants do make an effort to stay connected, just to ensure that the placed candidate's transition is going really well. And I know Evelyn has probably connected a couple times with Cassie since she joined her organization. And we find that that's an effective process to ensure that we stay connected and provide any additional support that's needed beyond the search engagement. Turn it back over to you, Antonio.
Hubert. And so on the next slide here is just a sample of what we call a full EDI-J engagement. And that typically consists of an assessment, a roadmap and action plan development process, and then what we classify as step 3, or integration support. And step 3 looks a little bit different for each of our client partners. A lot of the times it includes training. But again, for many of the organizations that we work with, a lot of this is internal focused on assessing current status of equity, diversity, inclusion within an organization, and to give them baselines of information that they can go back to down the road to assess progress and proficiency in different areas that they prioritize. So within step 1, or the assessment phase, if an organization decides to start there, we would do a variety of data gathering activities, such as reviewing documents, policies, procedures, usually also include a staff survey to gauge sentiment across different areas within the organizational experience, such as perceptions of leadership commitment to EDI-J, or perceptions of equity with advancement opportunities within the organization. Beyond the survey, we also often conduct focus groups to collect qualitative data to supplement the hard metrics to understand what is an actual experience related to this topic of interest that we want to probe further on. Additionally, we, in many cases, will conduct a proprietary process called the HR Equity Matrix, where we spend time with the human resource leaders within the organization and walk through each piece of the employee life cycle to understand, is this process or system systematized? Is there a clear written process and protocol for how staff across the organization should engage with things such as onboarding new staff or conducting performance evaluations or even offboarding staff? And we pull all this data together to help an organization understand what their current state is, what are the things that they want to affirm that they're doing well in, and what are some areas of opportunity that they could potentially action and do some activities and implementation supports to address areas that where they're not as successful or not as happy with their current state. From there, most of our client partners usually need an additional level of support where you take your recommendations, you take your assessment report, and you go through a prioritization process. In many cases, our assessments come with 30 to 50 recommendations on areas that you could potentially resource and pay attention to. For most organizations, it's probably more feasible that about 3 to 10 priority areas would be identified. And so we work with our clients to help trim that list down to the things that are most relevant, to the things that are most actionable, and to help build the plan of identifying who's responsible for the different priorities, what are the actual tactical steps that will be taken to advance those goals, and then how are we going to assess progress? Is it a survey metric such as belonging within the organization, or is it trust, etc.? And so each of those are unique to our client partners based off of their identified priority areas and the available resources and people power to advance the goals they've identified. And then thirdly, training and education or coaching support, very common outcomes or additional layers of support that we provide. What we want to share and spend a little bit more time with our additional panelists here is to talk about some little bit of different unique engagements that we have conducted. While this is our standard assessment process or standard full engagement, if you will, we do a lot of custom engagements where we deviate pretty dramatically from this process to sometimes creating an entirely new either evaluation process or implementation program for a client partner. So with that, I want to transition the next portion of our conversation today to actually speak with our panelists who have worked with us in the past or currently, and to ask them about their direct experiences with the work streams that we've had in play. So I want to start with the first topic here of overview of our overarching partnership. And what I'd like for each of the panelists to convey is really what was the need for support that your organization had identified, and how did nonprofit HR partner with you to address or solve or advance work on that need? So I would welcome any of the panelists, whoever would like to jump in first, feel free.
This is Othaline Lawrence, and I'll go first. And I would just have to say that the interviewing and search process was one of the best that I've experienced. The staff was very welcoming, and it was easy to connect with them as well as those that I was being interviewed by. As far as AFP is concerned, I need to preface that I've only been in this space for 5 weeks. This is my 5th week working at AFP, and I have absolutely no previous experience in the nonprofit philanthropy sector. However, aspects of diversity are transferable into every space. But what AFP realized is that they wanted to go to the next level. They laid a very good foundation and had a lot of work done, but they wanted to bring someone in dedicated to working on what we call as IDEA, inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. And they demonstrated their commitment by investing in me to attend their ICON conference before my official start date. So that was a great way for me to get to network, get a wide, broad look at what AFP was about, meet stakeholders, and really come up to speed quicker than if I would have just came in totally cold turkey. Some of the highlights from the interviewing process is that when communicating with the interviewers, there were people who expressed or shared that they had been with the company for over 30 years. That resonated with me really strong. And also there was a clear message that it was an empathetic
work environment that had great work-life balance. Someone shared that they had only been on staff for like 2 weeks, and a very close member of their family passed, and the outpouring of support and concern was overwhelming. And some of you online can probably identify with, you've been at a place for 30 or 40 years, maybe your father passed and no one even blinked an eye. So to me, that was very important. And the fact that there seemed to be a true connection from the very beginning across the board really helped me to feel comfortable about going into untreaded territory and taking that risk and challenge. I'm pretty fear adverse anyway, but everyone involved just made it a lot easier. And I hope I answered your question.
You did. And we were really hoping to get more of your experience in the process, recognizing that a search process is a little bit more standardized in terms of the protocols and how the search team goes through that. But still, just to hear from the candidate side, you know, the aspects that should be considered as part of that experience, which I think in many cases are overlooked or not even thought about. It's great to hear that you've had a very positive experience both during and after the placement so far.
You all did an excellent job at following up, making it very clear what the process was. So there were no bumps or surprises.
Thank you. Dr. Smith, I'd love to hear from you next. Again, going over what the need was that ADEA had and how did nonprofit HR partner with you to advance or solve that need?
Sure. The American Dental Education Association, ADEA, we represent all of the U.S. and Canadian dental schools, allied dental education programs, and advanced dental programs, which are like your residency hospital programs. And so we have we call ourselves, we say we're the voice of dental education. And so it's all your faculty, staff, students, and residents and fellows and administrators. And so you're talking more than probably 70,000 people, okay? Diverse regions of each country. And ADEA as an organization, we were very much in a space where as an organization, we for 22 years had the same CEO. We were coming out of that with a new CEO who had a different vision around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a lot of the other academic health professional organizations had conducted climate surveys or done environmental scans around areas such as diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, DEIB, and we had not. And so our new CEO, one of her major things when she was hired is that she felt it very important that as an organization that we lead and conduct a survey. And so Nonprofit HR was our partner and consultant through this entire process. We'd never done it before. It was monumental. And so we ended up surveying approximately 55,000 faculty, staff, students, and residents and fellows in the US and Canada at our member institutions, and then also some of our allied programs that weren't even members. It was a really good experience because it was important to us because we had no baseline data. So we'd been making decisions across dental education or oral health education without having, we had anecdotal data, we did membership surveys, of course we did senior surveys, faculty data, but no real survey around these key areas. And doing strategic planning, you don't have the data, you don't ask the questions. So now we have that baseline data. And now that was phase one, a nonprofit HR working with us, some of our members, and also providing that institutional baseline data to our dental schools, allied dental education programs. So I think 80% of our members, member institutions and programs participated. So we've got that rich data. And now we're working with them in a strategic capacity building institute, and nonprofit HR is our partner in helping them look at the data and think about how to use the data, and what it means for them.
Dr. Smith, beautiful summary of a couple of years of work now at this point. Stephen, you and I had the pleasure of being at the Program Directors Conference this week, actually, to present some of the findings there. I don't know if there's anything additional you'd like to share about the partnership, since you've been one of the primary leads with working with ADIA for the last 2 years.
Yeah, thanks, Antonio and Dr. Smith for that overview. One of the things that really stands out to me is the excitement. People are excited to create change on their campus. They're excited to move the needle forward, to advance this work, to create more inclusive and humanistic environments where people can thrive, because this is the future of dentistry. So when you think about when you're sitting in that dental chair, that hygienist or the dentist, these are impacting so many people across our country and in other countries as well, in Canada. So the excitement is there, the willingness to roll up their sleeves, dig into the data, create meaningful opportunities, is really, really powerful and inspiring. So it's been a wonderful opportunity for me to be that thought partner with ADIA and help guide and shape some of the future opportunities that people will experience in oral health care.
Thank you, Stephen. And Dr. Brewer, I know you can't be on camera today, but I want to see if you can unmute and potentially share and weigh in on this question as well. So I see you unmuting, so just to repeat it, if you give an overview of what your organizational need was and how you partner with nonprofit HR to solve or advance that, we'd love to hear about it.
Hi, yes. So ours is a little different. So our relationship was more on the capacity building side. BECU is Boeing's Employees Credit Union. We are the third largest credit union in the nation. And we are now still in what I like to call our infancy stages of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we were able to quickly identify was the need to increase cultural fluency. So our search was to find an external organization that will be able to aid us in that learning journey. And we landed with Nonprofit HR. Our experience with them was just completely phenomenal, especially mine, because I came in after the contract had already been executed. So as a new senior leader in the organization, I was able to quickly identify how well prepared their employees were, our consultants were, how they effectively communicated and kept everything on track. Whenever we needed something to be edited or explained a little bit more thoroughly for other employees, they were able to come in to do that. They assisted us with additional training that we were in need of when we didn't have the capacity in our office of equity and inclusion. And in addition to that, this year we had decided to launch a train-the-trainer program so that we could have employees who may not report to our office participate in increasing cultural fluency throughout the enterprise. So our search again was, or our overall need was on the capacity building side. And what they did to help us advance DE&I was help us craft the learning material, do edits when needed, facilitate some of our training sessions, and help bring other DEI champions up to speed as well.
Thank you, Dr. Brewer, for sharing that lovely overview. And it's been a great and fruitful partnership. We've enjoyed working with you as well. I'd like to transition to the next topic, and something that we as EDIJ or DEI professionals often discuss is that this is a journey. It's a process of evolution. We learn things as we go, and we continue to build our knowledge and skill sets with advancing equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice in various spaces, including our organizations. And I'd love to hear from each of the panelists again on this a couple of questions here about the evolution of your organization's journey with EDIJ, and where would you say your association started this work, and where would you say your association is now, recognizing that there's a spectrum of being and readiness to engage in tough topics, but feel free to answer this from your own perspective. Talk about the evolution of your organization's journey, and where did you start and where are you today?
This is Othaline Lawrence again. AFP is the member organization that's comprised primarily of volunteers, and I'll just say diversity, but I'm including diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, access, and all of that, but just making sure diversity started way back in the early 1990s, where they actually put in place a minority task force that developed into a committee. They determined that they would define diversity as it fits their organization and mission. And it evolved over time into really setting the foundation for different initiatives, such as the Women's Impact Initiative. There's also a group for African Americans who felt as though they weren't being heard and seen. So this group developed so they could share stories and have a network and community. Also, there's the Emerging Leaders Initiative, redefining what diversity means for AFP transitioned over time. And there are a lot of incentive programs and scholarships for young professionals. There are collegiate memberships. So there's a wide spectrum, and we have chapters in Brazil, Egypt, Mexico, Canada, and I believe also in Europe. We did have a chapter in Puerto Rico, so hopefully that will be revived, but that's just to give you an idea of the depth and breadth and reach of AFP. Over time, and a strategic roadmap was developed where it's a 4-part transport, from having vehicles, your fuel, drivers, and passengers. So our vehicles primarily have to do with training, coaching, and developing metrics. Our fuel or our specific idea content, idea champions, the data collection process and systems that we have, our drivers or our boards, our chapter leads, our idea committees, and our AFP HR. And then our passengers, of course, are our members, our strategic partners, nonprofit HR, and so on. So what are some of our outcomes from this transport system? Is to demonstrate that IDEA is implemented throughout the organization in every entity. So our vision is that IDEA becomes as simple and easy as breathing, that we don't have to think about it. It just is part of our natural organic process in everything that we do. Another outcome is to, of course, increase our chapters. We are a chapter organization. Establish effective external partnership and strengthen those relationships. Attract and retain fundraising professionals. The 5th is to create inclusion and accessible outcomes and engagement. And the 6th is to provide high quality tools so that IDEA can be effectively and sustainably implemented in everything that we do. And the ultimate goal is to ensure that we're increasing membership value, that they feel that their time is worthwhile and that we can see results and outcomes that are positive and impactful in what we do. I would have to say that, as I mentioned, it started in the early 1990s, and then Lori Gustav kind of worked and massaged it and kept things going, laid a strong foundation. Then Taryn Gold is the one who put in place the research on sexual harassment, did a lot of work with the affinity groups, started the Women's Impact Initiative, and the Emerging Leaders Program, just to name a few. So I'm really in a great position where a lot of things have already taken place. Birgit Smith Burton, who is the first African-American global chair of AFP, she established the brand of IDEA. and people just really gravitated to it, and it took off. And then they brought me along after a year search, trying to find someone to be dedicated in this space. So what I'm focusing on, speaking to the evolution, is to ensure that we have meaningful and measurable outcomes of what we're doing. A lot of work is being done in AFP. We realize that a lot of more work needs to be done. And I think that it's healthy when you know that you never arrive, that there's always room for improvement. So we're looking at really identifying how we can measure what we do to show and share the stories of the true impact of the work and the value that AFP brings to the community and those that they serve, that we serve. It's a we now.
I appreciate you sharing the long history, right? You've been doing this for decades at this point. So the culture and the environment that all of that work and effort has kind of evolved into, you're now experiencing as you onboard into your current role. And you've already given us some great examples as to how that shows up in terms of having a different and more positive experience. You connect and build relationships with staff. Dr. Smith and Dr. Brewer, I would welcome either of you to also weigh in on the kind of the evolution of EDIJ within your organizations as well.
One of the things that I will share from the American Dental Education Association side is, remember that our members are, the majority of them are contained within the university setting or a campus setting. So you have to think about the history of diversity, multicultural affairs, the various names from it that you hear: Chicano studies, African American studies, women's studies, from that perspective, and how that has progressed. So much of that initial focus shows up in our organization also because the focus was on numbers, right? So I think about it from a servant leadership type of capacity, and it was very much an initial primary or elementary view of diversity, equity, inclusion within our organization and on campuses. The focus was, we're not the same, you look different, so we must be different, right? And so it's difference, division, bias. It's on creating a critical mass of a group of people so that within a classroom, within the faculty ranks and administrative ranks, that you don't feel like you're the token only voice. And so it's on numbers. So I think initially within our organization, and because the accreditation standards also, they stressed, right, a critical mass, numbers, increasing. And so that was our focus. I think we, as society shifted, as campus culture shifted, we had to shift with them. So it was very much a secondary, or we are all unique. Diversity is in all of us, but it could be hidden from others. In order for us to identify and what makes us different from each other or similar, we must get to know each other. So it's all on, we are all unique. It's almost like a kumbaya type of feeling to me. And so you see that secondary level showing up within our organization. And that's really, I think, the focus. The focus is more on cultural competence. And, within healthcare, that has many different phases. It's a continuum. And so I think now we are finally moving to what I always call, like, we are more of a community. Diversity defines us. It's integral to everything that we do. It's what we talk about in terms of inclusive excellence. It should be the norm. It should not be the exception. It should not be separated. It's showing up in many of our initiatives, which I can talk about later, around new thinking for the new century, in which it has to be embedded in every key priority, and it's not an afterthought. And so it's basically, we share a similar purpose. Our goals are around community, but we value differences as individuals. We support one another, and we realize that diversity or differences make us stronger. With that, we're focusing more on health equity. We're focusing more on moving beyond a critical mass. Not that those things are not very important, but we're seeing the diversity standard shift. And so it's not so much cultural competence. We're focusing on structural competence. We're focusing on systems, how we embrace or basically serve our patients, how we basically improve access for students, faculty, and staff, and break down those structures, okay, that are systemic around racism, gender identity, sexual orientation, those systemic barriers. So I think that's where we are now. That does not mean that depending on what's going on in society or within oral health education or healthcare education, that we don't go back to primary. We're watching the Supreme Court in a few weeks. They're going to do the UNC, University of North Carolina, and the Harvard cases on holistic admissions, or whether race can be a factor in admissions. We're going to go right back to primary, right? Because it's about numbers. It's supporting our mission around how do we recruit and retain a diverse student body, including racial and ethnicity. And so we're very much going back to primary now, because we're thinking about how do we do that.
Yeah, those are a couple of large conversations, Dr. Smith, and I appreciate you raising them and just giving us a tidbit. But one of the things I would like the participants, the audience, to take away is it's an evolution, right? There are different moments in time where our focal point changes. We might be focused on one metric or one aspect of the work, but as we grow and move beyond that, it's important for us to not revert back to just the bare basics, because we would lose some of the progress along the way that we've made. So I appreciate that bigger message. Dr. Brewer, is there anything you'd like to pepper in here in terms of just BECU's evolution of their EDIJ journey?
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting. So prior to the inhumane killing of George Floyd, they started coming together and forming employee resource groups. So I want to say maybe a year and a half, 2 years before that inhumane killing, they put together a couple of employee resource groups, but they also put together a council that they called BUILD, and it's BILD, and it stands for Belonging, Inclusion, Leveraging Differences. So employees would come together and just hold space, create space for those who identify with certain backgrounds and cultures to create more, to foster more inclusion. And then from there, they had brought on, in 2020, they brought on a VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion to help create a strategy, a holistic strategy for the entire organization. And that's when the Office of Equity and Inclusion came into existence and started to expand a bit. Since then, we created our pillars of concentration for DE&I, which focus on our members, our community, and employee and culture. Under the employee and culture side, driving everything internally, we expanded. So now we have 10 employee resource groups, a DE&I core team that focuses on procedures and practices, our DEI council that's responsible for amplifying employee voices, the capacity building strategy, which is what nonprofit HR helped us launch and increase, as well as our multicultural leadership development strategy, which encompass our newly launched program for emerging leaders. So that's a bit what our program, what our journey has looked like. And then for our senior leadership, we started having them take part in an intercultural development process. And on that spectrum, it starts with it starts at the stage of denial, not really knowing exactly what you believe that and to all the way to adaptation, where you've really become so culturally fluent to where you understand things from a multi-lens perspective, to where you start to the extent where you can really foster equity, inclusion, a sense of belonging, and a cohesive team culture. So that's what our journey has been. That's what it looks like at BECU, and we continue to press toward the mark to where, as Dr. Smith mentioned, we have a strategy that focuses on cultural fluency, but we also want to start addressing the systems, the things that have been in place, especially been a financial institution. So those things that have been in place for many years that lack equity, that lack inclusion in the way that we do things, is what we're pressing toward the mark to complete as well.
Thank you, Dr. Brewer. And we had a question from the audience. If you could repeat the BUILD acronym for us one more time.
Yes, so BUILD stands for belonging, inclusion, leveraging differences.
Thank you for that. So BILD.
Yes, it was very different. When I came in, I said, well, what does that mean? What is that? And why are y'all saying differences and not diversity? So we had to really dig into the rooted reasons for that. But it stuck with them, and we just kept it in existence because that's a part of the secret sauce.
Thank you for that, Thank you for that clarification, and the audience appreciates it as well. And Othaline, the same question was asked for IDEA. If you could unpack that one for them as well. I think they might have just missed the words to the acronym there. I think you might be on mute.
You might be on mute, Othaline.
Sorry about that. IDEA represents our branding, which is inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. And I think it's very catchy. I like it.
Thank you for that. I want to do one more question before I open to the audience as well, because I want to take maybe one or two questions from the audience that are maybe a little bit more meaty. But this question is actually for all of us. I probably will abstain from answering because I'll ramble on here forever. But what lessons have you learned that other association leaders should be mindful of as they engage in EDIJ work? And I welcome Bert and Stephen to as well. You know, if you have something to share here, feel free to jump in.
I can jump in real quick and just share that a little bit of probably what I've shared in the past is we want organizations to really self-assess and communicate where they are on that spectrum of embedding equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice in their organization. When it comes to the search process, what I've shared in the past is we want to make sure that we're transparent with our candidates on where the organization is. So it aligns with what the candidate can bring. So I think it's important, and whether that's through a self-assessment or partnering with a firm like us to come in and do an assessment, I think that's probably the first step is where does and are they aligned? Is the staff and the board aligned in how they assess themselves around that work? So that would be one thing I would share.
This is Othaline Lawrence, and some of the things that I would share from personal experience and observation is that you really need to be responsive to the members and the communities that you serve. I love taking a bottoms-up approach, and with AFP, since we deal with volunteers, the crux of our IDEA program is on building relationships. And with that, you need to take serious attention and awareness to what the concerns and issues and expectations are of your customers, and have a customer-focused approach. And demonstrate commitment through tangible actions. A lot of times we have what I call talking heads, but people want to see actually how the needle is moving. You need to be results driven so that people can see actionable items that have been taking place, and also take a value added and measurable approach. A lot of people are resistant to doing surveys and data, but work needs to be data driven. You have to be able to measure it. And as Sonia said, looking at your processes and your procedures, it's not just a feel-good party. It's about doing the work and demonstrating that you're bringing value to the table and improving the lives of people around you.
Thanks. Others want to weigh in here.
Antonio, oh, go ahead.
Oh, Stephen, you can take it.
building upon, the gathering the data, right? I think it's important for associations to really look at what is the data telling you, and then set DEI goals and priorities that are measurable, right? That can advance the work. And that is it requires a level of accountability that you need to have, and with accountability, it's not just at the leadership level or that C-level, it's across an entire association. So not only within the staff, but then how does that translate to members as well? And part of that is investing in people. And I think that when we can invest in people to not only understand what DEI means at the association level, but how it can be actionable, that's where we're able to start to create some meaningful change. And so much of that is via leading by example, right? So creating the communities that people can see themselves in, the representation, and then also where they can flourish, right? And show up as their authentic selves. And those are some of the things that I've been working with a lot of our clients on, is how do we create those environments and that are led by the data and priorities that will help us reach that.
Thank you for that, Stephen. Anything additional from the rest of the panel? You can opt out.
I would like to weigh in because I think that the numbers to that point are very important. It really helps you understand where you are to gauge where it is you really need to be to reflect representation at all levels throughout the organization and your enterprise. The other side of that, at least for our organization, was really the self-assessment part. Managing your own truth, especially as a leader at the senior leader and executive level. Like, what is your truth, and standing in that? Because as leaders, we like to think that we know everything and we have the solution for everything. But realistically, when you get down to the root of it, we don't know as much as we think we know. So managing our truths, who we are as individuals, how we've been socialized and conditioned, which contributes to how we show up to support our employees, and then managing the perspectives of other people around us and those who we serve. So seeing the world through somebody else's reality. We can't approach everyone the same way. We can't manage and coach everyone the same way. And then the third would be like performing in a shifting landscape. Accepting what I need to accept to move forward and make a difference as a leader. The numbers are definitely a vital driver in the work that we do, but a lot of times leaders miss the humanistic approach because of how important we deem the numbers to be. So our learning lessons really came from learning what it is our employees need, and what we need to adjust and unlearn as leaders so that we're really showing up as our best selves for them. And from an employee, from an EMPS standpoint, we saw numbers start to increase with job satisfaction because we realized, hey, we were focusing so much on the numbers that we were missing, the humanistic perspective, the humanistic approach. So that was a major lesson for us as leaders, managing our own truths, how we've been socialized and conditioned, managing other people's perspectives, seeing the world through their reality, and then performing in a shifting landscape, which allows us to accept what we need to accept so we can move forward and make a difference.
Ton of great nuggets there, Dr. Brewer. I appreciate those. Lots to think about. Dr. Smith, is there anything you'd like to add? No, I think we got you on mute.
I think that my peers have articulated this really well. So no, I mean, I agree and concur with basically with everything that's been said here. I agree that it's, you have to look at the numbers, and because they help tell an important story. My caution is always that we go beyond the numbers. And the numbers are important, but listen to the stories. I'm a quantitative analysis, but I love qualitative work too. And because it helps us drill down to the individual experiences of people. And so I think once you have the numbers, you still have to do the extra work around the focus groups, building those relationships so that you can truly understand your culture and hear the stories in terms of what's really going on in the everyday world that your employees or your students or your faculty, various people are dealing with.
Yeah, that last point resonates strongly with me, Dr. Smith. As an academic as well, my colleagues in the profession will debate the utility of quantitative versus qualitative, and at the end of the day, you need both, is what I've learned, and that's my conclusion on it. So I'll pause here in the conversation. Tokatha, are there any relevant or related questions that are coming from the audience that we'd like to pause and maybe transition to one or two of those at the moment?
Absolutely, Antonio, Dr. Cortez, and Dr. Smith. And if I may add a third statement, I would agree with both of you that we need both quantitative and qualitative. So great conversation going there. Here's a question that came in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, organizations are committing resources, both financial and people, to advance EDIJ. As the economy has shifted, so have available resources. What recommendations do you have for associations that are struggling to identify resources to meet their needs?
I'll jump in here. One of the things that we're doing at our association is a couple of things. One is we're partnering more with other organizations. There's been a lot going on around the lack of African American men who are entering and graduating and becoming physicians, dentists, dental hygienists, I'll throw that in there. Also pharmacists, I could keep going. But what we've done is we've partnered with the 19 other academic health profession associations around optometry, physical therapy, public health, to join forces to basically expand our reach, because we each have limited resources, but when we pool resources, we have more, impact in terms of strategies and being able to reach down and address areas around academic readiness and systemic issues. So I'm really much into partnerships, both externally to expand your resources, but also internally. DEIB touches everything. So what I have learned is to look at the projects and key initiatives that are going on within my organization and partner collaboratively with other departments or other project leads to help maximize my impact. And so that's just one thing around partnerships that I would share. And not only that, it increases your power and your voice. So I'll just share that. That's one thing we do.
I'll definitely weigh in here, but I want to let the panelists say first if they have some thoughts on resource allocation or acquiring resources, or thinking differently about how we fund some of the efforts we're trying to advance.
I also think engaging your volunteers and your membership is an opportunity, and leveraging skills and expertise that exist within your organizations, right? So I think that that's also an opportunity, and this is where, organizations are trying to do a lot, right? So really prioritizing and strategizing around what can you do to streamline, to create the most impact or your largest return on an investment. So sort of using this as an opportunity to refocus around what may need to sunset, what can we really focus on that will drive the most impact, and staying course, right? We put money where things matter. And if we're investing in DEIB work, we're investing in people. And I think that that's a message that is, you can't really argue with, right? Is that people investment piece. So again, prioritize and strategize, engage your volunteers and members, and advocate for the internal needs at your organization.
Yeah. And I would like to add that tying into what Stephen had just said is really leveraging your affinity and employee resource groups, because they can get involved with community outreach, help with recruiting, and you have people who are like-minded and share the same values to draw those groups in and really build relationships, starting there or expanding to that area.
I would have to concur with both of my peers on the panel. So as the economy continues to shift, and resources, like many organizations that, they were from my lens and in my opinion, they were quick to get rid of a lot of their DEI practitioners, because we don't, as they say, we don't bring in the money for the organization. But we definitely, we leverage the skills and the talent that exists within the organization. We believe in putting our people first. And when we have that type of mindset, we understand the importance of having our DEI practitioners. And then doing what makes sense. Like sometimes you have two people doing the work that one person could be doing, perhaps, but it takes a deep analysis. So we believe in making smart decisions at VCU, and one of those smart decisions is making sure that we keep our people first. And so with that, while the economy has shifted, especially for many financial industries, we've not made any changes to our capacity within the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion.
Thank you all for sharing those. And something I would like to weigh in here as kind of, again, being the outside partner that works with a lot of organizations, it's helpful to have a transparent conversation when you have a scope of work that you want to accomplish and you have a set budget. And I will be honest, I'm surprised, but also in really optimistic about the number of conversations I've had this year alone on, I want to do these things, but I only have X amount of resources to do that. What's feasible based off of what we have capacity to, partner on? And a revised scope of work is something that is easily discussed and evaluated. And the worst thing that can happen is the answer is no, we can't make that work. But on the other side of that is always the opportunity of, well, actually, with that bucket, we can accomplish these three things. And it's not the five things that you wanted, but these three are going to give you good ROI in terms of advancing your equity goals within your organization, and will bridge the gap between the next cycle of when resources might be made available again. So sustaining the work is really an important piece to consider as you're thinking about constraints with resource allocation. Otogatha, welcome. Maybe one more question from the audience, and transition to another topic that they're interested in.
Yes, here's another question. We are at the infancy stage of our belonging and inclusion effort. When is the best time to establish an employee resource group?
I think it should be the initial part of your strategy, to be honest, but I would say before you launch your employee resource groups, you need to do a deep dive of the demographics across your organization levels. Not sure if my peers on here would agree, but understanding that will help you determine what employee resource groups are most likely desired, and then launch surveys to help you get even more of an understanding. And that should help you determine what employee resource groups are needed and how many.
From my experience working with employee resource groups, I've taken the position that if you have 2 or 3 and you get the ball rolling, others will come. Others feel you have to have 20 or 50 to start, but you have to start from somewhere. And if there's an employee resource group that has 5 people and another that has 20, that's an opportunity for us to treat them equitably. Because if there's an interest, I believe in motivating and inspiring people to come together and be able to voice their opinions and share their stories, irrespective of the size.
Any other thoughts on starting ERGs?
Well,
Other thoughts, Antonio? I think it's also it's an opportunity for all levels of staff to participate. It doesn't necessarily maybe have to be your leadership that leads those groups. It's an opportunity to engage other staff and give them a leadership opportunity. I think I've seen that a few times where that's successful.
and Bert, you bring a very good point, because I've heard others in executive positions say that, well, we don't have the right people doing the idea work, and realize that these are all volunteer positions. My perspective is that if people are interested and they're fired up and they want to do the work, because it's always a challenge even getting someone to even want to get in that space and do the work, that it's our job to support, motivate them, and give them the tools to succeed and stay engaged. And then that's how you develop leaders and empower people to move forward.
At ADEA, there are only 70 employees. We have 30 people in the employee resource group. They have subcommittees. They just did the DEI ADEC, which they call themselves, advisory committee here. They just did awards. It is a very inclusive group. It is a recent group. It came out of unfortunately the George Floyd and listening to employees, but they do so much internal programming. It was about giving them the resources and supporting them, and stressing that it wasn't just a certain group, but that it that the composition, what we were trying to achieve, our mission, it was inclusive of everyone. They are so active, I can't keep up with. And just think, it's 70 of us, we got 30 of them who are active in this group, very active.
Yeah, and that just speaks to, I think the variation in how those groups can be structured is really interesting. And there was a point made earlier that I want to tag back to again, is they will come and evolve over time. And that's been true even internally at Nonprofit HR, where we started with a few affinity groups. We surveyed our staff and we said, okay, these are the ones that we think are the most beneficial or the most resonating. And fast forward a year, 2 years later, 2 additional ones just out of natural evolution popped up, and we had staff that were energized and ready to lead, and they came at all levels within the organization. We have everyone from associates up to the senior leadership involved. So it's great to see. I want to dig into one other topic next. I know we're kind of towards the tail end of time here, but I'd love to cover at least 2 more topics if possible. And this next one is targeted more directly at you, Bert, in terms of sourcing EDIJ roles, and specifically thinking about our association organizations that are out there. We have 3 associations represented here on this panel, and would love to hear from your side for those association organizations, or actually any organization that is searching for a professional to lead this body of work or lead this within an organization. What are some of the characteristics or traits that you believe would be beneficial for a candidate to have to advance this work?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Antonio. I think it's important in all types of recruiting or search engagements. In addition to like our executive professional search services, we also apply this to our recruitment outsourcing services, which works with client partners on high volume hiring. So we embed that in all of our lines of service as it relates to recruiting and search engagement. Initially we're going to start with screening that focuses more on experience, right, and the background and the qualifications to really do the job, because that's what they're looking for. Is organizations are looking for the experience in this particular area. But specific to characteristics, and this can come out when we're conducting our vetting sessions, when we've already validated that maybe they have formal experience or background in that meet the maybe minimum or preferred qualifications outlined in a job announcement. But when we have those conversations with candidates, we really want to see, one, can they demonstrate empathy, right? Do they have examples of being able to do that, and how they communicate with folks, how they engage others? how they lead, not manage staff. Can they do the same and demonstrate that they're inclusive, that they've created that type of culture, whether it's with the staff or board member? And then we'll inquire what is, what their perspective is on EDIJ, or what their approach would be to maybe embed that in the culture or apply some strategy. So those are the ones that come to mind. And again, that goes beyond the work experience, is that how do they demonstrate that in those discussions that they have with us, and then eventually that they would have maybe with the organization themselves.
Thank you for that, Bert. And kind of a follow-up question, but I think this one, I would also welcome Bert and Dr. Smith to maybe provide some perspective here. As you prepare for a search, where would you look for someone to occupy an EDIJ or DEI role? And the reason why, Bert, is obvious why I'm asking you this question, but Dr. Smith, you've had a team of professionals that you oversaw, so I'm curious to know, if you were looking for them, where would they be? So feel free to weigh in here.
Well, that's a good question. It's depending on what the role is and how what your needs are, but I would say we're pretty open. We used to be more prescriptive. Of course, I agree with Bert around knowledge. You want certain knowledge and skill sets and things like that and experiences. But I've learned over time that if you have the basic knowledge and skill sets, there's certain things characteristics that you want around how flexible or agility. So we write our job descriptions a lot more broadly than we used to, which is a big deal for us. So we typically don't, it used to be that, we would say we wanted someone definitely from academe, or we wanted someone from the from healthcare. We don't do that anymore. The key, I think, that we all realize, and it's been said here, is that DEI is very transferable. There are certain things when you go into an organization you're going to learn, or that you're going to have to learn about the organization no matter where you come from. So for us, we start thinking about characteristics around how agile the person is, how they demonstrate that, examples. I focus now a lot on self-reflection, on how, if you're in this role and you are DEIB, you have to be very self-reflective. If you are not, it will be very difficult for you. People will make you, whether you want to be or not, more self-reflective. It's, of course, you talk about being a good leader. So I say all that to say, the other characteristic I will say that I wanted to mention is the power of persuasion. A lot of DEIB teams don't have a lot of institutional power. They don't. So it is about the ability to get other people on board to buy into your vision. So how well do you articulate that vision to various constituencies, particularly even those who don't buy into DEIB? I say that because I always have to go to the board for certain initiatives, large initiatives like this massive climate study, and Stephen knows there were people who were anti-DEIB and open about it. So how do you bring them on board? So you want someone that is agile, is a visionary, and who can speak and think strategically, and who is a great persuader, and you want them to be able to show evidence. So key thing, I don't write job descriptions as prescriptive as I used to. Key things around knowledge, experience, yes, but there are other key characteristics that are harder to be taught that are just as important. And so I kind of focus on some of those around agility. I agree with empathy, listening. I agree with also some of the things around persuasiveness and communication and being self-reflective.
Thank you for that, Dr. Smith. Lots of great nuggets there as well. Bert, any insights that you might share on where would we find these professionals?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's not just in one location where we're going to say, hey, go to this place and you'll find folks that fall align with what you're looking for. So Part of our practice in our search services is, we are going to look at like organizations to find our top candidates, right? Some will call it poaching, and we will do that, not with our own clients, of course, but with other organizations. We're not shy about that, because in other like organizations there are staff that are maybe looking to move up, right? So they may not be in the certain level, a specific level role that maybe the organization client that we're working with is looking to fill, but it's maybe someone that's proven themselves at a different level at a different organization, and maybe they've hit the ceiling there and they're looking to move up. So we'll start with organizations, and then there are some groups. A lot of this is research that you can do online, is try to search for community affinity groups around particular topics and start there. Looking at the organizations that maybe are not similar to your organization in what they deliver, but maybe the organization focuses on social justice or diversity, equity, inclusion. So that's their mission. And obviously, whether they have a staff that's a dedicated chief diversity officer or not, a lot of those staff there have to be skilled and have the traits and qualities to deliver the work that mission is calling for. So typically that's where we'll start. I think we're blessed because of the years of service that we've provided as a search practice, that we have our own internal pipeline that we've built. For us, focus on diversity, equity, inclusion in the search process, it's not an extra step for us, it's just embedded in the process. So with the staff that we have that's diverse in itself, we've built up a pipeline because we do that by building relationships with candidates. And so we'll obviously start looking at our internal pipeline and then some of the external groups that we just talked about.
I appreciate that perspective, Burton. My takeaway here is relationships. That's the word that kind of strongly resonates out throughout, because if you are going to have a connection to a strong pipeline, you have to have some type of relationship with that network or with that group or with the individual specifically, and you have to cultivate that over time. So that's probably true for all types of positions, I would suspect. But I defer to you as the search expert. Atokatha, I know we are close to closing, but any additional questions that are hot from the audience? We'd like to hear at least one more now.
Yeah, we've got a follow-up question to something Sonia was sharing earlier, and it is, given the backsliding, particularly from the political space on DEIB, how are your organizations addressing any sentiment of staff who were against it or see no value in DEIB initiatives, and who may be a bit more vocal now given some of the current trends and climate?
Well,
one of the things I will share is nonprofit HR is helping us with that as part of our strategic capacity building institute. And so one of the things that we are doing a train the trainer, part of this model is not just about helping our schools and programs understand, how to use the data, but also working with them to train others to address this issue around anti-DEIB, how to talk about it, with how to go back and talk about it within the space that they are in. So I want to give nonprofit HR a shout out for that. I think we have this institute coming up in August, and I think what you're going to bring to that, along with the other piece, will be invaluable when people go back to their campus. I like that it's a train the trainer model, so that they will be able to share. One of the things I will say is, for us, we focus, I try to meet people where they are. And I try to understand first how they view DEIB. And it is usually very narrow, or there's some experience that they've had that is very negative that I can speak to. But I often stress belonging and inclusion, and I start there, and what they are and why they're important and how they touch everyone without watering down other key areas and focus areas around diversity. I've noticed that helps because they start to see themselves in the belonging and inclusion piece. And then the other thing that I will say is I try to find a common area where everyone has to get on board. For us, it's accreditation standards around DEIB. So no matter how you feel about it, you got to get it done, and or you're going to lose your accreditation. And then finally, I'll say this, and then let my colleagues weigh in. There's a part of me that, to a point, I won't even get in the conversation. I realize some people, I'm just not going to change their mind. I know that sounds hard. It sounds harsh, but I only have so much emotional energy, and I only have so much time. And so there are certain times when I realize there's nothing that I can do and say. I'm not talking about when it's key stakeholders, but that I can do and say. So I have to make a decision here. Am I going to spend 3 days, 6 months, or a year trying to convince this group to go in this direction, knowing that they probably aren't? Or am I going to take that time and energy and focus on a key area where I need to make a difference? So there's some strategic decisions you have to make around that. And I know that there can be pressure around urgency, an urgency when certain events happen for us to react and go in a certain direction. But there's a part of me that at some point I don't engage certain groups after a time because it's not going to change. And I know that sounds harsh.
I have, Dr. Smith, I agree. That's the approach that I take at our organization, and the approach that I've taken throughout my career as a DEI practitioner. A part of meeting people where they at is just understanding that they may never get where you desire them to be. I don't believe in forcing anyone to do what it is that they do not want to do. And some leaders just do not want to lean into this type of work. So I help them understand the importance, and then whatever that they choose to lean into out of what I've shared is what I make my focus for them. And then I just pay more attention, or not pay more attention, but invest more of my time and my energy into those who really want to infuse DE&I into the work that they do and how they show up and serve.
Yeah. And I think a part of it is that some people really do not realize that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is for everyone. They think it's for someone else, and they have this narrow view of its applicability. And what I hear a lot is that older white males do not feel that it applies to them at all. So just like you have a proposal, you have to build a business case and demonstrate how it brings value to their life and what role they actually play in it. And of course, there'll be some people that you cannot persuade or influence because they have their own way of thinking. But recently we had an incident where someone wanted to remove themselves from the space, and it was a matter of letting them know how they do bring benefit outside of their perception of their self because of what they think other people think, if that makes sense.
That makes sense to me, and I ascribe to all three of my colleagues here who have shared. From a nonprofit HR standpoint, this is something that I think we actually excel at, is kind of holding that neutral space for folks to engage in the conversation, engage in the work without feeling like they're being pointed out or parted out or singled out for having different opinions or beliefs. At the end of the day, within the organizational context anyway, I'm not necessarily here to change anyone's mind, but I am here to potentially change some behavior, which we do have control over within organizations. We have protocols for how we expect our staff to show up and how we expect them to engage and interact with each other in a professional, respectful, and hopefully inclusive manner. And so we can create those values as an organization. We can help our client partners create those values as an organization and start to model behaviors at the leadership level and show the rest of the staff, this is what an inclusive culture looks like at our association, at our organization. And I think those are the things that we focus on more so than not. And as a psychologist, maybe Dr. Brewer, you might agree or disagree here, but it's very hard to change someone's opinion, but it's much easier to change how they behave in a situation or within a context of an organization. So those are just some initial thoughts on my side as well.
And I also want to add really quick, if I can, that, you know, we talk about understanding and appreciating the differences, but I think that there's a lot of value in really looking at the the things that we have in common and what we share universally.
I agree, and Dr. I agree with both of you, and Dr. Cortez, I would concur with what you shared. I may not be able to change your mind because for so long people have been conditioned to see the world a certain way, and based on how they've been socialized and conditioned throughout their lifespan development contributes to, you know, their thought process and their worldview. So my intent is never to change your mind, because the way that you think contributes to diversity of thought. But I definitely would like to change the way you behave, especially towards others who may not look like you, who may not share the same cultural background or perspective. Even if you share the same cultural background, you may not share the same worldview or perspective. So the goal really is not to change people's mind, but to influence them in a way that changes their behavior and how they show up.
Thank you all for that. And Atogatha, feel free to keep us honest on time. Do we have time for one more question, or need to transition?
One more question. Yes, we do. So this question is, can one of our panelists or more talk about conducting equity audits focused on approach, tools, outcomes, and ways to address outcome disparities?
I feel like that one's targeted to Stephen or myself. So equity audits can look different for organizations depending upon what we're trying to assess. We typically at Nonprofit HR bucket them either as internal assessments that are focused on staff, or external assessments which are focused on either members of associations, volunteer groups, or other key stakeholders that exist outside of the organization. And so first is deciding what scope or what population you're really trying to assess and better understand. And the external assessments, in my experience, are always one-off scopes. It really depends on the structure of the member base. With a DEI as an example, doing a climate study externally means we have to account for tens of thousands of people and different stakeholder levels, different stakeholder roles, faculty, administrators, students, etc., different regions, different languages. So external assessments tend to be a little bit more complex and one-off, but we're getting really good at them in terms of scoping and planning. Internal assessments are actually much more straightforward in most cases, where we would look at staff perceptions of the organization across many factors using a survey and focus groups, as Dr. Smith mentioned earlier. Those are invaluable. But additionally, looking at processes and procedures and evaluating, you know, if we apply these across different dimensions of diversity, would people have different experiences depending upon where they come from or who they are or their different identities. Additionally, looking at processes and systems formally and drawing a line through all of those things. And so if an assessment is something you're interested in, Nonprofit HR could potentially be a partner that you would like to consider with that work. But I welcome any other thoughts on assessments. I think assessments are great and vital for getting a starting point and understanding where you're at today.
I'll add to that, Antonio. One of the things that I really appreciate about our process is we collect a lot of demographic data. So one, we can see, explore representation within an organization. And then two, we use that data to analyze different trends on how different groups can be experiencing the same environment differently. And what's powerful about that is it provides you with a baseline understanding of where your people are in relation to their social identities and their experiences. And that is valuable feedback when we start to think about how do we shift and change cultures within an organization, how do we create programs and structures that are more equitable, and how do we move this work forward across an organization and for members as well. So I think that there's a lot of really powerful benefits that can come from doing DDIJ focused assessment.
Yeah. And I would just like to add, when conducting an audit and you're developing your questions, it's not just asking the question, but how you ask the question, how you have it framed, and to ensure that it isn't intentionally structured to guide the person who's participating in a certain direction.
Agreed. Okay, Togatha, I know we're at 4 minutes here, so.
We sure are, Antonio. Good timing. Thank you all so very much for such a lively conversation. That's all the time we have today for this webinar. Very, very special thank you again to Antonio, to Stephen, Bird, Sonia, Pro, and Othleen for leading such a dynamic discussion. There are other webinars coming your way in 2023. Be sure to check out our events calendar on nonprofithr.com/events. And be sure to hang around for the feedback survey that will pop up when this event is over. Your comments help us with our planning and also can inform topics that we cover as well. And now, Antonio, I'd like to turn it back over to you all just for a quick word of advice from each of our panelists. Got about 30 seconds each. Any advice that you can leave our attendees with as they consider how they can implement some of the advice that you all shared today?
All right, I'm just going to call on people to make this go smooth. So, Othleen, would you like to go first?
I would just say that the work that we do is extremely important, and we can see how over time the social construct has changed. It really attests to the power of diversity implementation in the platform that's been built. My biggest wish that people take away is to pursue with empathy, not just hearing what people say and sharing your own stories, but relating to them and providing support and resources and help build people up to help them do the work.
Thank you. Dr. Brewer, anything from your side?
Yeah, I will leave everyone with ensuring that you move with positive intent always, and good intent for the organization. There are many ways to approach this work, but you must first do a deep analysis on where the organization is and what it is they actually aim to achieve within a certain time frame, so that your approach is conducive for where they are and where they desire to be.
Thank you. Dr. Smith.
Just a reminder that in terms of assessment, you're constantly assessing. And I mean, you're doing pulse surveys, you're doing different things. So don't think about the diversity audit or the equity audit as a one time every however many years or once a year, however often every 3 years you do it. Remember that you're constantly collecting that data and using it and learning from it and reassessing. The other thing that I will say is, as you think about creating buy-in and getting resources, particularly from senior leadership, make sure that you are strategic and that you can articulate and connect your initiatives to strategic goals and values that the organization holds. That is just essential.
Beautiful. Perfect timing. Great points all around. I concur with all of them, and appreciated the time to share a little bit about the work that we do with association-based organizations and some of the unique scopes of work that we engage in and continue to engage in and advance across the sector. Atogatha, any final words from your side?
That's all. Thank you all so very much for joining us. We'll see you on the next webinar. Have a great rest of your afternoon.